The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here. Dan could not be with us tonight, but I'll be flying solo with my former co-host and your current deputy mayor in the city of Oshkosh, Tony Palmeri. Tony, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Cheryl.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
You're not running for anything this time. You're just here to talk about city issues.
Yes.
So we're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Want to talk first of all about the deer culling, because that has certainly been a huge issue. I don't want to say of late, but at a meeting a couple weeks ago, that was a huge issue. And one of the reasons it was an issue, I think, is because a fourth culling happened and it was unannounced to the public.
Right.
As was a third culling, which we hadn't heard anything about either.
Right.
But as much of an uproar didn't seem to be made over that. I don't recall any issue being made of it. In fact, a lot of the people that I've talked to, they've said, oh, there was a third culling?
Correct.
They didn't know anything about it. But you were really upset about this because, for a number of reasons. There was no notification of the neighbors.
Right.
Some variances, one for feeding deer and another for shooting off firearms
Right.
in the city. The variances on those had been expired.
Correct.
And then there were a couple of other things that were brought up at the meeting. Apparently the deer were supposed to have been feed traps or bait traps were supposed to be put out, I think, for 2 weeks prior, and the chief of police said it had only been 1 week that they'd been doing it. And then the fourth issue was there was no police presence out there at the time.
Correct.
And so I wanted to have you on so we could talk about these things. I mean, I don't think it's any secret. I've certainly made no secret of the fact that I'm opposed to the culling. I think that there are other ways of handling this problem. And of course, you're never going to eliminate it altogether.
Oh, of course not.
That's
Right.
just not going to happen.
No, not going
but
to.
I had some mixed feelings about that particular meeting.
Correct.
And the way it went down. And I guess one of the things was, let's talk about the no notification first. City Manager Roloff said that he didn't, originally he said he didn't want to do anything that would undermine the efforts of the newly formed Urban Wildlife Committee. But I don't know, do you think that this unnoticed culling maybe did undermine those efforts a little bit, or not so much?
I know for a fact that there are now people on that committee who are having second thoughts about being on it because they believed that they were going to have an opportunity to discuss the culling before another one would take place. So, and I think City Manager Roloff did lead people to believe that when he said, I don't want to undermine the new committee, that meant I will get some advice before we move forward, but that didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing was really kind of confusing because, like I said, most of us didn't realize that a third culling had taken place.
Correct.
And by us, I mean citizens in the community. There were, as I said, so many people that I've talked to that have said didn't know anything about it.
Right.
And so that, I think, was one of the issues that upset you in particular, and I think Bob Peschel, to a degree, was upset. He was upset for other reasons, too, that night.
Yeah.
But the no notification and then the variances being expired, this is where I kind of am on both sides of the equation here with this, Tony, because it was in, what, October, that City Manager Roloff came to the council and said, you know, do you want us to do another culling? What do you want to do here? I mean, it wasn't a formal type thing. It was just sort of an informal, get your opinion kind of thing. And at that point, he was kind of given the go-ahead to go ahead and do this before the contract expired at year's end.
Correct.
But yet, he admits that they forgot and they dropped the ball on not getting these variances renewed. But no one on the council brought it up either.
Well, you know, at any given time, Cheryl, we've got anywhere from half dozen to a dozen to a couple of dozen issues before us. I've got a thick file on most of our issues.
Right.
I didn't get to the deer cull file until after it had been announced that this would take place.
Yeah.
So by that point, it was too late. But you know, it did occur to me. People have asked me since, well, why did those variances expire on April 1st when the contract went until December? Right? And for a very good reason. In April, as you remember, of '09, there was an election.
Right.
And the reason why the variances expired in April was because the understanding was a new city council would not necessarily want to move forward with the same policy. So therefore, you would not lock a future council into especially a firearms variance. So I know Bob Peschel that night didn't state himself very eloquently necessarily. But
Not very civilly either.
yeah, well, one of the things that he was upset about, and I would be upset if I were him, he was elected in April,
Right.
right? And in fact, where he did best in the election was in the ward where the culling took place. So if anyone should have had a say in whether or not we should move forward with, say, a firearms variance, it should have been him. It would have passed.
Yeah.
There would have probably been 2 votes against it. But the fact of the matter is, in moving forward without renewing the variances, this council didn't have a chance to debate it. And that's just, to me, a violation of good government. And I agree with you. Someone on the council should have noticed this.
Yeah.
But having said that, we hear all of this rhetoric about professional staff and we shouldn't micromanage them. Well, if professional staff don't notice things like that, the ordinances, then I guess I have to micromanage. What are my choices?
Right.
At that point?
But still, micromanaging or not, nobody brought it up.
No one brought it up.
And, you know, and so that's an issue. But, you know, you bring up another point that I think is interesting about, you know, a new council being seated essentially every April, because there's
Right.
always an election, whether it's 3 people or 4 people. There's always a new council that's seated in April. Maybe in hindsight, the contract should have only gone, you know, through like March, so that a new council could review the whole thing.
I
Because
think,
what good is a contract if you can't feed the deer to bait them, or you can't shoot them with firearms?
My understanding was that urban wildlife specialists, the sharpshooters, would only come on the condition that it was a 1-year contract. So if we had only done a shorter contract, my understanding is they would not have signed on for the deal.
Well, I mean, it's too bad that some things happened. And then, you know, Dennis McHugh at that meeting made a very big issue, and he really took exception with your position on this, saying that, well, then all these protesters from the first 2 cullings, you know, they should have been, I forget exactly what he said, but he certainly didn't think that their behavior was appropriate. And I'm sitting back and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, if it was so outrageous, were there any tickets that were issued for disorderly conduct or for noise violations or for the road rage incident that we heard the chief talk about, where somebody apparently followed the sharpshooters out of town on the highway? I mean, if these things happened, and I'm not saying that they didn't, but if they did happen to the degree that some of these folks are saying they happened, and the police were there during those first 2 callings,
yeah, exactly.
why? I mean, were any citations issued that you're aware of?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, I firmly, and this is my position from the beginning, I believe people have the right to protest the actions of their government at the time those actions are taking place. But beyond that, Cheryl, this was a safety issue. Way back in early 2009, employees of the Armory had made the statement in a meeting, we have it in minutes, that they didn't believe it's safe to sharpshoot in the Armory. So at a minimum, you've got to have neighborhood notification. And the police did an outstanding job in late '09. They actually went door to door, handed out flyers, and gave at the...
08, you mean, right?
08, whenever we did the first...
Yeah.
08, I'm sorry.
Getting confused on the years here.
Yeah. Thank you, 08. They went door to door, handed out flyers. You know, that's the way you do notification.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you would agree with me. If there was shooting going on in vicinity of your house, you'd want to know about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I will not believe ever that there are people in this city who do not want to know if sharpshooting is going on in their neighborhood. And we didn't give people the opportunity to know that, apparently, because protest makes people uncomfortable. Well, of course, that's the goal of it.
Well, and it was interesting that, you know, one of the comments that City Manager Mark Roloff made, and I like Mark, I like him a lot, but I kind of perked up when he said this, because he said that he didn't not do a notification, or the chief didn't not do a notification, not because of the protests, but it was primarily because the bait traps had been tampered with during the third culling. Well, and I was waiting for you especially to pick up on this, because you're so sharp and on top of these things, Tony, but not a single person on the council picked up on this. If the third culling, which they said was never announced, if the bait traps had been tampered with during that third culling, then if it hadn't been announced, how would anyone have known to mess with the bait traps, the feed traps, or whatever you want to call it? Right. You know, and I'm not pointing fingers anywhere, but there's only certain people who knew that those things were going down. Certain city staff, certain police staff, and probably people at the armory and the Vulcan quarry. Unless someone saw traps being set or whatever and tampered with them. And that's why I say I'm not pointing fingers in any direction, but it certainly wasn't common knowledge in the public.
No.
So to be out there blaming the opponents of the deer culling for tampering with the bait traps during the third culling, I think is kind of silly, because they had no knowledge that this was going down.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, and if an event is going to be followed with that much protest, I mean, perhaps the city should conclude from that it's not a popular policy. I mean, again, I have to repeat, Mr. Peschel got some of his highest vote total, and he was the only candidate that ran openly against deer culling.
Yeah.
He gets one of his highest vote totals in the ward in which the armory exists. So what is that saying?
One thing, and Dan couldn't be here, but I know that we talked about this a little bit, and I've heard this from other people too. I'm not going to read your whole blog posting here, because it's long, and you know, people can go to your blog and read it. But there was a final statement, and you said, regardless of how one feels about deer culling or fire trucks and pump stations, I hope we can all agree that a city manager ought not have the power to direct an organization or individual to discharge firearms in violation of city codes. And this is the part that got people. Giving a local executive that kind of power is more in line with the old Soviet Union than the U.S. Constitution. Do you think, looking back in hindsight, that was a little bit of a stretch to make that comment? Because that upset a lot of people. I mean, I too looked at that and I thought, wow, that's, how are you drawing that comparison?
Well, I don't know. Do you feel comfortable about having an executive that can allow firearms to be fired without any variance to do it?
No, but, you know, no, I don't.
That's power. That's pretty powerful.
Well, but he did say that it was an honest mistake, that he overlooked it. And, you know, if the council has honestly and truly, sincerely overlooked it, who's to say that he
It's not just, I find, first of all, I find it hard to believe. And, you know, if Mr. Roloff tells me he forgot, I'll believe what he says. But the idea that the city manager, the chief of police, the city attorney, not one person remembers that we need to have the law on our side to do this. I mean, I just find that very, very hard to believe. And I honestly don't, Cheryl, think that that's an exaggerated statement. I think you're dealing with setting off firearms in an urban area, which is, everyone would agree that should be a rare event. If it's going to happen, it's got to be transparent.
Yeah.
And we really dropped the ball on that. So, I mean, I know that you know, Mark is a nice guy, right? I don't think he's a Soviet era communist. But on the other hand, I really think we set a horrible precedent by saying that the executive of the city can do something outside the law, and it's aw shucks, just forgot, no big deal, without even a pledge that we'll do better next time.
No.
You know, that night at that meeting, I kept trying to press, well, you know, is this a one-time deal? And no one even wanted to come forward and say that they could promise it wouldn't happen again.
All right. How did you feel personally? I'm not asking you to defend his actions, but how did you, as the deputy mayor and someone who sits right there next to Bob Peschel, feel about the way he just really went after the city manager that night?
You know, I think it was one of those situations where his general point, I thought, was sound, but then he had kind of what I'll call like a mini meltdown where he couldn't stop. Yeah. But as I thought about that statement, his general point seemed to be that at the meeting that night, there was a pattern of lack of transparency with the 91 and James Road.
Yep.
With the deer culling, and there was one other issue that night that people were
Oshkosh truck.
Oshkosh truck, and
or
so
Oshkosh Corp.
You're right. So if I think if Mr. Peschel had stopped there, if he had said, you know, there's this pattern here tonight, people coming forward, lacking information, feeling confused, that sounds like a breakdown in our administration here. If he had stopped there, it would have been fine. Instead, he went on. It was kind of like a half sermon and half political speech. But you know, having said that, I know the Northwestern took this position, which I think they stole from Vince Lombardi, which you should praise in public and criticize in private.
Yes.
Well, that's all well and good, but my understanding is that's the way old boy networks stay in place. So all I can do with Mark Roloff is praise him in public, and then how do you as a citizen know what we're doing in private? I mean, this is one of the problems I have, Cheryl, with the evaluation of the city manager. It's fine to say don't evaluate publicly. That could be a violation of personnel rules. But what assurances do citizens have that in fact any meaningful evaluation is taking place behind closed doors? So there has to be some balance. That's why at the last meeting I said, you know, we're going to evaluate the city manager. Are people comfortable with at least anonymously releasing their ratings of the city manager? I don't think everyone on the council is comfortable with that, and I'm fine with doing it a different way. But what I'm looking for is some way to give the public assurances that in fact this city manager, whether he's great, mediocre, poor, that in fact he is being evaluated. If a council just comes out and tells me, don't worry about it, we did it, he's been evaluated, that doesn't inspire confidence. And as you know, that's what has plagued this city for many years.
Yes, it has. So where do you think that the evaluation is going on right now?
Yes.
So I'm not going to ask you to really talk about that because you could potentially get in trouble for that. So we don't want to do that.
I'm so worried.
But where do you see this evaluation process, the results of the process going? I mean, do you think that the results will be released at some point? And do you think it should be done anonymously, or do you think that they should own up to the way they actually voted or graded or critiqued the city manager?
I believe that the idea that an elected member of the council cannot openly tell the public what he or she feels about the city manager. I haven't had time to consult the Attorney General, but to me that's got to be a misreading of state law. Right? How can it be that the people you elect to hold the administration accountable can't tell you what they think about that administration? Should there be personal attacks? No. Should there be cheap shots? No. Should there be random attack? Like Bob's statement that night seemed kind of random all over the map. No, it shouldn't be that. But we ought to be able to make professional criticisms, I believe. But you know, if I had to predict, I would predict that we'll probably release some kind of general evaluation to the public. I think that's what most members of the council seem comfortable with.
Okay.
But, you know, we'll see.
Okay. Is that what was done the last time when Dick Wolink was still on board? How were the results released then? Do you remember?
You know, this is the city attorney, Lynn Lawrenson, is looking this up for me because no one at that meeting could recall how it was done. Some people believe that nothing was in fact released. But I know that I personally have copies of documents that were used to evaluate City Manager Wolink. And
See, I thought something was released, but I can't remember, you know, what or to what degree and in what form it was.
And one of the points I made at the meeting was if the press can, I want Lynn to find out for me, can the press make an open records request of that kind of information? And if the press can get it, then I believe everyone should get it. So we'll see. But you know, Cheryl, you and I have had this discussion before. This points to one of the problems with this form of government. that we've got to go through these lengthy gymnastics to evaluate a manager. And I know that we're probably not in the near future going to change this form of government, but if your chief executive is an elected full-time mayor, the public evaluates him or her every 4 years. And the councils don't go through this, what is sometimes a nasty, uncomfortable process.
Right.
But it's what we have, and I'm trying as deputy mayor, who's responsible for moving it along, to make sure, the criteria I've set out is that whatever evaluation we do should be fair, it should be rigorous, and it should be transparent. I think the part that is the most difficult is the transparency, because it gets into that, what can you say publicly and so on.
Right. Well, and maybe that's what Bob Peschel was alluding to that night, because he did sort of have a lot of disjointed kind of rambling thoughts.
Yeah.
But, and I don't know why that was, if he just got nervous or what the deal was, but he made a comment about the problem with this form of government.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what he was alluding to. But the way I took it, sitting back at home listening to this, it seemed like he was saying, well, if we had had a different form of government and an elected mayor with full-time powers,
Right.
other than a ceremonial type mayor like we have, that this breakdown in communications wouldn't have happened. But that doesn't guarantee that.
No.
I mean,
No.
I've covered city government professionally in other communities where the mayor has gone and done something, and the council members find out about it by reading the paper.
Yeah.
You
Right.
hear that kind of thing happening all the time. So that doesn't guarantee that you're not going to have a breakdown in communications.
No,
You know?
you're absolutely right. Breakdown in communication will happen under any form of government. But I just find it just frustrating that we seem to spend an inordinate amount of time on these process issues.
Yeah.
Hours, how do we evaluate them? At the last meeting, Mr. Tower even suggested we should, as a council, be discussing what survey questions to use. Can you imagine a city council trying to collectively write a survey? We would be there till all evenings of the, all hours of the evening. So there's got to be a way to do this that is, again, fair, rigorous, transparent, and doesn't take us, numerous meetings.
Okay. I want to talk about transparency a little bit as it relates to the fire truck.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that's one of your.
Yeah, I've got a problem with
No,
it.
I know you do.
With the way it was handled. I
know
don't
you
think
do.
it should have been pushed through that same night. One of the biggest things that you've complained about in the past was the fishing pier and how that was pushed through
You're right.
the day after the Parks Board met. And this was kind of done in sort of the same fashion. And this person, CJ, who blogs on comments on your blog
Right.
a lot, and some of the others, this person compared the accountability issue too
Sure.
with the fire truck and the deer culling. And I know you took great exception to that, saying that they're really different. But when you look at transparency issues and accountability issues, can we put it on a different levels for different things? Right. Do you feel, looking back in retrospect, that this fire truck thing was rushed through and shouldn't have been?
It was rushed through, but having said that, it was legally noticed. So unlike the deer culling,
So
where
was
there
the
was no
fishing
notice
pier,
at all.
though.
Right. The difference in those two situations, I think, and maybe we bought a bad argument. The reason why the plea was to pass it that night was because, which I guess was November 10th.
It was just before
Yeah.
the holiday parade.
Right. The argument was that the holiday parade was coming, and this would be the opportunity to roll this truck out and begin this fundraising argument.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind, the council was unanimous in voting for this. Bob voted against it, but then he voted.
Which I
but then
thought
he
was
voted for
strange
it.
too.
Right. Right. Well, he was voting first that night, and I know for a lot of councilors, when they vote first, it's very stressful, because you're basically setting the tone for the rest of the council.
Yeah, but he wasn't stressed out, and he knew where this was going, Tony. Don't make that excuse for him.
Yeah.
He knew where this was going.
He should have known where it was
He came
going.
back and he said that he didn't want people to think that he was against the fire truck, that
Yeah.
he was against the being rushed through. And he should have stuck to his guns on that,
Yeah.
because he knew at that point already it had passed. So just leave your no vote stand.
Yeah, I thought that night the testimony of Fire Chief Franz was important, persuasive. He seemed to suggest going through with it, and then ironically, it wasn't at the holiday parade.
Because it broke down, and it's apparently
Yeah.
still broken down.
Apparently.
So,
Yeah. So in hindsight, should there have been more time? Yeah. But the argument was you want to get it out to this holiday parade, and unfortunately that didn't happen. So,
but he could have done that without the city making this formal policy that it was going to adopt this or accept this gift. I mean, you guys still could have considered that at your next meeting. I mean, I don't think that there were going to be throngs of people rushing out at the holiday parade with checkbooks or wallets in hand to donate to this thing, and I really don't think it would have made a big deal. Now we've got a situation, as you know, you've referenced that you read the blog, and I've talked about this there. Now we've got a situation where if he does not turn the truck over to the city, and someone has specifically earmarked their donation for the fire truck, the city has to turn around and send the money back. I mean, is the city staff spending a lot of time on this? No, but they are spending time on it. And citizens didn't have an opportunity to comment on it, and it's time that they could be spending on something else.
although we ended up getting more comment on it than probably most other issues that come before the city.
Yeah, well, you know, I think it's one of those things, Paul Esslinger attracts, he's a lightning rod for controversy.
Oh, sure.
And so people are going to comment on it, you know, but I don't know, I don't think it should have been rushed through. And do we know, is he going to turn the truck over to the city at some point?
My understanding, based just on that November 10th meeting, is that once the money is raised, it would be turned over. But I don't know where we are with that. I don't know where the fundraising effort is or whatnot.
Well, it's apparently not too far along.
Yeah.
And unless he's got more fundraising efforts planned, I don't know how he's going to get a whole lot more money. So I don't know. It just seems like it was another sort of exercise in futility. You know.
Well, I mean, I guess what I saw as probably the bigger unfortunate part of it, and I understand completely what you're saying, is that we don't have a gifts policy in place.
That's one of my next questions.
So the issue, what I had rolling around in my mind was, all right, if we did have a gifts policy in place, because obviously the absence of such a policy, we can't never accept gifts.
Right.
So I was thinking, okay, if we had a gifts policy in place, would that policy probably allow for acceptance of this kind of fire truck? Right? It probably would, is what I was thinking. Although this was a very unusual situation. I've never seen a situation where someone goes and buys the historical artifact and so on. But be that as it may, that's the way it did happen. But we do need a gifts policy, and I don't know where we are on that. Hopefully it'll be coming soon.
My understanding is probably yours, is that other things keep coming up that have to take precedence.
Yeah.
But, you know, we do need a gifts policy, and this is years in the making, supposedly. I mean, we've been talking about it for years. We were talking about a gifts policy when you were still hosting the show with me.
I know.
So it just seems like nothing is, you know, as much as we move forward, we're going backwards in some respects.
Well, in the special events policy, I mean, we're on the verge of approving it, but that ended up being problematic too, because it ended up being poured over mostly by people who have a great interest in it. I'm not sure it ever really got out. You know, you're talking about public input.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the general public ever really fully got what that policy is. We haven't approved it yet. In fact, I still haven't read the latest edition of it, haven't had a chance to. But I do think for the gifts policy, we're going to need to make sure that it's a little bit more grassroots and you know, the average everyday citizen does get more of a chance to comment on it and comprehend it before we move forward.
Well, you know, and speaking of policies and gifts and that kind of thing, the Leach Amphitheater was a gift.
Yeah.
And this is kind of something that has, as I'm sure you know, has sort of stuck in my craw. We still don't have any kind of a facility fee attached to the tickets over there. Is that something that you think is going to be coming forward anytime in our near future, or are we just going to be stuck at some point, like so many other facilities in this community, where things need repair and we have no money in the budget to do it?
I remember it did come up during our budget workshops, but I remember being told during the budget workshops that the budget was not the appropriate place to change that kind of policy. And so, but again, we said that, but now no one has come forward to put it back on the agenda. I'm very glad that you raised that, because now that I think of it, it would be a good idea for that to come forward before the Waterfest season.
I mean, it was a gift, and
comes in,
we
right.
all, you know, a lot of us were opposed to it at the time,
right.
but nonetheless, it is here. It is a beautiful facility. It's a well-attended facility, and it would be a shame to have this thing fall into disrepair at some point. And, you know, with budgets getting even tighter,
True.
that would be even more difficult to muster up the funds to go and fix
Right.
it.
And I believe the Chamber of Commerce has always been opposed to having
Well, they
anything,
have, and
right.
so has Waterfest.
Right.
But no one will ever convince me, or nor probably you, that someone will not attend events there, whether it be at Waterfest or something else, if they have to pay an extra 50 cents.
I agree. Or even $1.
Yeah, even $1.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. Do you have any, well, I'm sure you know because you're from New York City, but I bet a lot of people out there would not know how much they're paying for facilities charges at some of these places that are just sort of built into the ticket price.
Right,
You don't
right.
even necessarily know it until you get your ticket stub and you see. You know, I've seen some as much as $3.50.
Yeah.
You know, am I not going? Well, the ticket's already bought by that point. But even if I knew ahead of time, if it's something that I really want to see, I'd still spend the money and go.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because now I'm thinking we definitely have to put this on an agenda before the Waterfest series kicks in, because now would be the time in the next month or two to really decide if we want to do this. I don't know if we have 4 votes for it on the council, but you're making an argument that's completely rational.
Well, and their argument in the past has been we're opposed to this because we've got our promotional materials set, our website is set. Well, it doesn't take that much to go in and change a website. Promotional materials, okay, fine. So, yeah, do something before you get all your promotional
Exactly.
materials put together.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
and speaking of policies, this was a big issue last year when we needed to find someone to take over Paul Esslinger's seat on the
Yes.
council. It worked out fine, but we still do not have a formal policy in place for appointing a council member.
On the February 23rd agenda, that's the second meeting in February, there will be the first reading of an ordinance change that would basically try and put in the codes the process that we used to put Harold Buckholz in there.
Okay.
Lynn Lawrence and the city attorney is working with me to put the language together that would do this. Basically, currently in our municipal codes, it says if there's a vacancy, we will follow Chapter 17
Yeah.
of state statutes. The new language would basically say that if there's a vacancy, we will accept applications. They will have to include a resume, a letter of interest, and a 30-day period, whatever. So basically, it would be the process that we used to select Mr. Buckholz and put that in place. Again, I don't know if we have 4 votes for that policy, but I thought it worked out well.
Well, yeah, and it did, and some weren't happy, some were, but it did work out, and I would hope that there'd be 4 votes on the council for it. I mean, since you guys all sort of adhered to that policy, I mean, why would anyone be opposed to it, I would
I
think.
think there are still people in the community who do believe that the runner-up should be the person selected. There are other people who believe that the solution to this is to just change the eligibility for mayor. I mean, the reason why we got into the situation was because Paul still had 1 year left on his
Right.
term. But there could be vacancies for many other reasons,
Sure.
right? So
You could have anyone run for mayor.
Yeah, exactly.
And their council term still might be one of those staggered, weird kind of terms.
yeah, so I believe it makes sense. And actually, the city of Green Bay has a policy written in place that is very similar to what we did to select Mr. Buckholz.
Okay.
So it will have its first reading in February. Hopefully we'll vote on it in March and we'll see if it passes.
Now, is that something that you've brought forward?
I
or-
have brought that
okay.
forward, yeah. I finally got the chance. We've got all these issues and whatnot. But I finally had the chance to work with the city attorney and say, look, let's try and move this forward. And she's obviously swamped too, but she did tell me on the phone the other day that on the February 23rd meeting, she will have the language in place
Okay.
for the first reading of an ordinance.
All right. You want to talk Oshkosh Corp and their TIF?
Sure.
We've been talking about this with the candidates, and you're actually in a position where you're going to be voting on this.
Right.
I know how you feel about TIFs. Our positions are very much aligned in that way. I think I know how you're going to vote on it, but one never knows, you know, and you may not even know at this point.
Right.
But, you know, it's interesting. I hear all these different arguments out there. Well, they're a big employer.
Yeah.
They've never asked the city for any money. That's not since when is that a criteria that should be, or a criterion used to give someone $5 million of TIF money? That just doesn't make any sense to me. And I have yet to really get a council candidate to be able to explain to me how they would justify a yes vote when there's that but-for test. No one can convince me that this development will not happen unless they get this $5 million from the city. It's a $3-point-something billion contract.
Yeah.
Are they not going to do a project just because they can't get $5 million from the city of Oshkosh?
I know, especially since they've got a commitment of $35 million from the state of Wisconsin.
Well, and we just saw their P&L statement a week or two ago, as we're taping this, a week or two ago, you know, and it looked pretty healthy to me. So I don't understand this.
Well, I haven't really taken a position for or against it because to this day, we're taping here on February 4th.
Yep.
I have not seen a formal proposal. And maybe other councilors have. I have to this day not been presented with any. I've read some things in the paper. I know the Plan Commission had something. The council has seen nothing yet formally. So until I actually get some formal proposal in front of me, I don't know what really is being asked for. I agree with you. I mean, the idea that we ought to give you $5 million because you've been a good employer, I mean, that TIF is not meant to be like a perk.
Yeah.
It's not a pat on the back.
There's a lot of employers in the area who are successful who have never asked the city for a dime.
Right.
So I don't understand that logic. Now, Burke Tower, when he was on talking about his candidacy, he did talk a little bit about this. And, one of the things, because I said that there's no guarantee that these 2,000 jobs, if they truly create 2,000 jobs, there's no guarantee that those people are going to live in Oshkosh. Some probably will, sure. But there may be a lot that don't. They've got a lot of employees right now who don't live in the city. And Burke made a very, I think, legitimate counterpoint to that. And he said that at least with a TIF, you've got money from different entities within the taxing districts. And so people in the county would be ponying up some of the money. Okay, I can buy that argument. That's a good one. But how about that but-for test? How about the blight issue? There's just some of these things that bother me.
Here's some things that I find of concern. We read this week, and thankfully the Northwestern has finally started to do some good reporting on this. Jeff Bollier's finally done a couple of good articles on this. The editorializing has been atrocious, but the reporting now is asking some important questions. For example, it turns out that the city manager was trying to work out a deal for a loan. Yeah. And apparently Oshkosh Corporation is insisting on a direct cash payout, $5 million. Well, that suggests to me, as I suggested at the December 22nd meeting, is this a financially healthy company? Because if the company is in good financial health, then first of all, they probably shouldn't need any assistance from the city.
Right.
But secondly, why not a loan? A company that needs $5 million in cash, that to me doesn't sound like financial health.
Yeah.
And I know that their defense division is doing well. We're in 2 wars, after all.
And we see week after week about the contracts that they're getting.
But and that's all in the defense division.
Right.
Other divisions, they grew fairly, extensively the last 10 years, are not doing as well. So, I think we need some answer to that question. Because if it's not a financially healthy company, is it wise to throw $5 million out there? Is the city going to get stuck with this? And also, you and I have talked about this before. I thought our administrators established this principle 3 or 4 years ago that we were never going to do the direct payout TIF again after getting burnt on the 100 block.
It was going to be pay-go TIFs.
It was only going to be pay-go
Pay-as-you-go.
TIF, right. Now, for some reason, this cannot be a pay-as-you-go TIF. I'm sure there's some good reason why. I haven't heard it yet. So maybe that will come up. But I agree with you. There are some real concerns here. You talk about the jobs and whether people will actually live in Oshkosh. Will the jobs last longer than the duration of the contract?
Well, that's a good point too.
The contract is military contracts are essentially 4 to 5 years. TIF district, as you know, goes on for 20 years. So
Or it can. It doesn't necessarily have to.
right.
That's the lifeline that it
Right.
can have.
And then we find out that for this to work, we have to have the donor TIF scenario and all this. So there seem to be enough red flags here that the council should take a very critical look at it. It's going to be difficult to vote against because, again, when the bottom line seems to be it does mean jobs in the community. But I don't think it's unreasonable to ask this but-for question.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone honestly believe that if the city council does not turn over the $5 million, that this paint shop, whatever it is not going to get built?
Yeah, they're not going to
Oshkosh
turn
Common.
down a $3.6 billion contract.
Absolutely not.
That would be dumb business.
Right, right. See, what got us down this road, Cheryl, and I know that you followed this over the summer, was what happened with Mercury Marine in Fond du Lac.
Yep.
Where the city and county of Fond du Lac gave away the store to Mercury Marine.
Right.
I think lots of big corporations have pulled from that, come out with this too big to fail argument. If you and Oshkosh want us to stay here, you're going to have to pony up this money. I hope at the very least, if the TIF passes, and I suspect that it will, can we at least start having some meaningful long-term discussion about things like office space for Oshkosh Corporation? Remember all this talk about the riverfront?
Riverfront, yeah.
Why
Class
doesn't,
A office space.
yeah. Why doesn't Oshkosh Corporation want to set up on the riverfront? So
Well, in this argument that, well, if they don't get this, then they might leave the city. They are so invested in the city of
Yeah.
Oshkosh with building after building anywhere you turn. You can't go to a section of this town, I don't think, and maybe, except maybe the Far East side. But other than that, I don't think you can go anywhere in this city and
Right.
not see an Oshkosh Corporation facility somewhere.
absolutely.
And it's the same with EAA. If they don't get their way, they say, well, we're just going to leave then. Well, look at all the land that they have out there. Look at all the investment that they've made into their buildings and their expo every year. I doubt seriously that they're just going to pack up and leave.
Right.
This crying wolf argument is ridiculous.
I agree with you completely. My position on TIF, which I think your and my position are very similar.
Yep.
TIF at a minimum has got to meet the criteria established in state law, especially that but-for test.
And it's not, they've never asked us for anything before.
Right. Once you go down that road, I mean, we had this problem with the Shopko TIF. I mean, that really stretched it. Remember, I made the argument at the council meeting that, look, we're in a real rough retail environment right now.
Yeah.
The idea that Shopko is going to come to Oshkosh, open up a second store, I found that a little bit hard to believe, and it turned out Shopko's not coming.
Yep.
So,
Dogs in the park. Or
Yeah.
parks. Let's talk about that. When you were on I think it was the last time,
Yeah.
maybe it was the time before that, you talked about bringing this thing forward, and I said at that time, because you said it was going to be advisory, and I said, well, if you really want to find out what the people feel and are truly interested in doing the people's bidding, make it binding. You didn't go that route, but even just an advisory referendum, you couldn't muster enough support on
Yeah.
the council for this. And I know that the city is very much divided on this, but there are city after city after city that have dogs that are allowed in parks. I mean, I've got this thing here where the city
know.
has done, and I'm sure you've seen this, page after page after page of communities that allow dogs in their parks. The Parks Department has put this all together.
I've seen that.
Now, the rules vary from community to community as far as how they allow them, what parks they may allow them in, that kind of thing. But nonetheless, they've made accommodations for dogs in their community, and they're making it more, resident friendly, I guess, more family friendly. And most of us view our dogs as family members,
Right.
So, but anyway, I don't know where this is headed. Do you see it headed anywhere? And is anything being done with this data that the Parks Department has gathered?
Not to my knowledge, but my guess is what you would find in all of those cities is that they didn't necessarily do referenda, but they
Right, it's just that they allow them.
Right, but before they allowed them, they did a much better job of trying to gauge where the population was. And what I told the council that night was
What a referendum would have
right,
done.
exactly. What I told the council that night was, look, if we turn down this referendum, I hope there's some way of finding out where people are, because this is one of those issues where I guess I'll say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Because every time we talk about putting dogs in parks, you get this avalanche of email from people who are opposed to it.
Yeah.
And then it creates this impression that, aha, we're 50-50 divided. I don't know. For all I know, 75-80% of the people in this city have no problems with dogs in parks. But until we get either a reliable poll, a referendum, which I think would have helped bring up the voter turnout, because we're going to get a really low voter turnout in February, unfortunately. Until we get, or in April, until we get something like that, I think we're at this standstill. I mean, I know that Councilor Jessica King had a very sound idea that we ought to do it by petition, around certain parks. Well, we had a petition for South Park, but if you looked at the petition, almost no one who lives in that South Park area had their name on the petition. There were people who lived in the north side of town. I mean, I don't think that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So if we're going to do the petitioning, it should be community-based, people who live near that park who want to do it. But who knows? I don't see anyone on the council so far moving forward doing anything, although there might be things going on that I'm not aware of at this point. I hope we do move forward, because I agree with you. If all those cities are doing something, Oshkosh does seem to be kind of on the outs. I mean, do we have to have dogs in every park? Probably not.
Well, even if we did, I mean, so what? I could go either way with that, but, I mean, state campsites, for God's sake, allow
Right.
dogs in them.
Right.
Are we saying that we're above a state campsite, that there's something more sacred about our parks other than a state campsite? And
Right.
it just seems
Well, what I
silly
had
to
said
me.
was, if we'd had a referendum, and if the referendum came back 65-70% in favor, I would have immediately moved forward with some kind of ordinance to allow it. If it would have come back 50-50 or the majority against, I would have said, no, we clearly don't have support for it. But the council voted that down, 4-3 vote, and then didn't put anything in its place. So we're kind of like at a standstill right now.
And the one that I thought was interesting, because you could consider him to be the swing vote, was Harold Buckles. He voted against it because he said he couldn't see spending the money on the referendum. Well, it's an election. It's not going to be any extra money, really.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we were asking for a special
Right.
referendum
Right.
vote or anything.
And then he said, and it would probably be 50-50. Well, we
You don't know that. You don't know that
We
until you
don't
put it
know.
out there.
We don't know.
The pump station by Miller's Bay.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of people are still kind of confused about what this really is, and then of course secondary to that is, where is it at? What's the status of this?
Oh.
Can you explain to people, Tony, what this is? Because I can't really explain it
Well,
as good as you can.
Where it's in a part of town, north side, that experienced heavy flooding. And in any city, when you're experiencing that kind of heavy flooding, generally there are several main ways to handle it. One is through the retention/detention ponds. Another way is through these pump stations, which are structures that basically take the water from where it is flooding and pump it into another location. In this case, they would pump it into Miller's Bay. Our Department of Public Works, working with consultants, have argued that in that Melvin area region, the options are either a small detention pond and a small pump station, or no detention pond and a large pump station. Now, other people have been contacting me saying those are not the only alternatives. Some people are claiming we could teach people how to put rain barrels on their properties,
Rain gardens,
and so on. So there are other alternatives. We understand why people are uncomfortable with detention ponds in that area, because it would require, my understanding is, tearing down at least 6 houses. And it's a solid middle-class neighborhood.
Right.
People don't like having the homes torn down. And of course, people just don't seem to like these ponds,
Right.
especially if they're in their neighborhood. The problems with pump stations, they do use more energy. They, from an environmentalist standpoint, they basically take dirty water and they put it into a waterway, Miller's Bay, which is already troubled water. So there don't seem to be lots of good alternatives here. I was kind of upset because the word got out that the large pump station would be $1 million more. We don't know that.
Yeah.
We haven't had any formal study that said that yet, so we'll see what happens. I do know that the people in that area seem to be solidly against the pond. So if the choices presented to them are pond, small pump station, or just a large pump station, the majority seem to want that large pump station. But we'll see. I mean, we're not there yet, and if other alternatives are presented, we'll see what happens. We know we have to do something about the flooding.
Right, right. King Clift Auto, the parking lot there that they used for their car dealership is being proposed as the city buying it and using it for a parking lot per se. You know, do you think we need more parking downtown in the form of a parking lot? And I guess the second part of that, Tony, is does it bother you at all the way it bothers me and other folks in the community that Jackson Kinney, our former economic development director, is involved in this? And he's going to prepare the documents that would be brought forward to the city. That bothers me a lot. I mean, this is a man that the city manager let go.
Yeah, and he's now working for Public Administration Associates, which is
the former city manager, Bill Free's
Bill
company.
Free, and then Steve Hentz, I guess, is in there.
Yep.
And, on the first part of your question, do I think we need the parking lot there? No. I think that we ought to be able to consider some more imaginative uses of that property. Secondly, well, hey, Mr. Kinney is entitled to make a living as he can. It is somewhat ironic. I don't think we thought we would be seeing more plans written up by Jackson at this point, but we'll see. I mean, I guess the parking would probably benefit the Roxy restaurant more than anyone else. I mean, and Roxy, like Oshkosh Corporation, has been, great business here for a long time. But does it follow then that you ought to use city money to build a parking lot?
For them,
yeah.
I mean.
And it wouldn't just be for them, of course. But
right, but it's mostly their customers who I bet would use it.
Some people have contacted me to say that ought to just be green space there. Maybe we could have more. We really do need a downtown grocery store. And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in building one. But I'll tell you, that would be a great location.
Well, it would, and we've talked about that for years too.
Yeah,
you and I have, and others in the community too. I mean, especially for those, for anyone who lives nearby downtown and doesn't want to make the trek over to Pick and Save or wherever. Yeah. But you look at some of those folks in, assisted living, like at Marion Manor, and then you've got the people at Mainview Apartments who have low income. A lot of them may not have cars to get to wherever, and if you're buying groceries for a week or whatever, depending on the size of your household, you may not be in a position to take a cab around town to get to and from the store. It would just be so nice to just have something right there.
Yeah. It'd be great if someone would set up a kind of like food co-op. You see a lot of those in places like Milwaukee, or even something like an Aldi grocery store, because they're very affordable. And appeal to a low-income, fixed-income population. But for some reason, people who are entrepreneurs in that area don't think that downtown Oshkosh can work, and I'm just shocked by that, because we have so many people living downtown now.
Well, and look at how many years Walgreens, when it was downtown.
I know.
I mean, it was successful for years and years and years.
You're right.
And I don't know that it actually went out of business because it was not successful anymore.
Right.
I don't recall why it went out of business, but certainly there were a ton of people who shopped there for as long as it was there.
So I would hope, Cheryl, that before the council would agree to a parking lot, we would at least ask our city planners to come up with options. What would be realistic? I see the parking lot as the kind of, if there's absolutely nothing else you could ever do there, all right, make it a parking lot. But I don't want to believe that about this city. I got to believe, especially after the vision report seemed to suggest there's so many creative things we can do downtown. Let's make this an opportunity to do something creative.
Sure. Well, and you are right that Mr. Kinney has a right to make a living, but you talk about micromanaging. I think that anything that this man brought forward, given the fact that he seems to have sold the council, not just the current one necessarily, but previous ones, a bill of goods and misrepresented things time and time and time again, I would hope that you on the council would really scrutinize that with both eyes and then some.
Right. I would hope so. And I think we will.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but I just want to touch on a couple of other things here. Burke Tower, he's running for re-election, and one of the things that he talked about on this show, but he also brought it up at the League of Women Voters Forum, is that he thinks that one of the things we need to do as far as improving our processes is working better with our partners, working a little bit more closely with our partners like CHAMCO and OAEDC or whatever those initials are, our development corporation. And, while that's all, and the chamber, of course, and while that's all fine and well, I said to him, another partner in this are the citizens.
Yeah.
And, we need to work more closely with them, especially when it comes time to let them know that their homes may be foreclosed on, for lack of a better word, by eminent domain. Things being stuck in their backyard, like trucks from Oshkosh Corp.
Right.
Do you think we're making good inroads with working with citizens?
I think we're in a somewhat better position than we were a few years ago, but we have a long way to go. I mean, you just mentioned the pump station, Melvin Avenue. That even took the council by surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens is we have these workshops. Something is on like page 4 of the PowerPoint slides. Then it reemerges 5 months later, and you're told, "Well, you guys knew about this." Well, we need to do better than that. And we need to have more regular citizen input sessions and so on. It doesn't mean everyone's going to show up, of course, but we especially on eminent domain, as you're saying. I mean, we on the council have known about James Road and Highway 91 since September of '09, but the property owners haven't.
Yeah.
I think at one point they were told they should have been reading the newspaper or something like that.
Well, that's not a way of notifying people.
No, that's not a way of notifying people. So, the moment property is on the radar screen, those people who own the property should be told about it. And I don't think we've done well enough at that yet.
And that's that's something that is coming up relatively fast.
Yeah.
I mean, June seems like a long way away when we're only into the first week in February, but it is already the first week of February, and it seems like Christmas was just here. So this time is going to go fast.
Absolutely. And so, a lot of this has been brought on to us like because of these flood issues. And I mean, the council can't, on the one hand, tell the administration, be aggressive on this, but then when the administration does that, we then back away.
Right.
We can't do that. But I don't think we have backed away. If you look at it, there have been quite a few meaningful projects accomplished. But again, your broader question on the citizen input, transparency, we have to do better in that region.
Yeah.
Much better.
Well, and I agree that some progress has been made, but there is a ways to go.
And
yet.
on economic development, you said Mr. Tower was talking about CHAMCO.
We're almost out of time. I'll just tell you that real quick. So.
Well, how did the Chamber of Commerce end up in a closed meeting with the city manager over the Oshkosh TIF?
I don't know. How do any of these things happen?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
good point.
All right. Well, Tony, thanks so much for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And appreciate your answers, even though sometimes we disagree on
Absolutely.
stuff. But that's fun. We can still walk away and still be friends.
Yes.
So, thanks to the cast. Thanks to the crew. And to you folks at home. I've been watching too many award shows lately, I think. Anyway, thanks to all of you and to the crew. And Tony's our cast member.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.
All right.